Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal. Our mother this week is Gwendolyn Henley Shamblin Lara.
Ugh, what a mouthful.
I know. You might know her as Gwen Shamblin. She is a religious leader, I guess, is
Yeah,
how you would describe her.
I think that's the easiest classification. It's definitely the one that she prefers. She identified a lot as a pastor and a leader of her church, and she evolved a lot over time. So she started as just a Christian woman, very traditional, very old school, and kind of developed into one of the, in my opinion, main female church leaders in the country, where in the Christian based faith of these extreme religions, you don't typically see women at the pulpit. They're normally in some kind of supporting role. And she created a church and a foundation and what some call a cult, and is the leader herself while still presenting the idea of being subservient to a man, which is an interesting kind of balance that she portrayed herself in.
Yeah, Gwen was definitely like a evangelical Christian and was very passionate about the religion. She was also a boss and a leader, and she was completely in control of her organization, which she sort of started as a faith-based weight loss program. It definitely was that over the years, but it became a lot of things. She wrote books and she ran the church and she made a lot of money, but she definitely also preached being submissive to your husband and to your church and to your God, and that women's places were beside their husbands, behind them. It's a kind of a hypocritical way to present, but
Absolutely. So I would argue that Gwen kind of came into the spotlight through her books that you mentioned when she became an author. Her history is she started off in the Church of Christ, which is women are very secondary in that world. There's the level one is the man, level two is the women. They are to be seen and not spoken. So she really identified with Christ and really loved this journey of him, but also was very focused on diet and her looks, I would say. So she went to school and
yeah.
got degrees in dietetics, dietitian.
She's a dietitian, but I don't know
Yeah.
what the other form of that word
And then she
or
ended up
how to
getting a
pronounce
master's
it.
in food and nutrition. Yeah, some kind of technical
Hmm.
term for it. But once she had
Yeah.
that, she became a registered
Which I
dietitian and then promoted this like mindset.
Yeah, and I think that of all the female cult leaders, if we want to call her that, um, I think of all the ones that we've talking about so far, she is the one that has the most education to back up her
Yes.
the things that she's preaching. Like she's not just completely making everything up. She really did study theology. She really did study weight loss science. She really like she did know those things, and she was very informed on these topics. I don't know that I necessarily agree with them, but she really could speak intelligently on Christianity, the Bible, weight loss, food, like those things she was basically an expert at.
You know, that's a really great point and something that I kind of hadn't really thought about because there's always been that authority that speakers have had in strong religious groups or high control groups, cults, where they have that charismatic nature of them where if you speak confidently they're just like, "Yeah. I just know it because I don't know, the higher power told me." And she had both that And well, according to this research, so she could really talk her way into either conversation. And I think that's a really great point to bring her authority at such a high level because she got a lot of traction, particularly with Way Down Basics and her Way Down workshops, which they actually ended up doing a documentary series on. It's on a bunch of platforms now, but really focusing on her message was by following God and submitting to Christ, you can lose weight. And there's hundreds of testimonies of these people coming up and I lost 20 pounds, I lost 50 pounds, I lost 150 pounds. And on the surface, it seems like a really great option if you are a religious based person and you're struggling with your weight, or even if you're not religious and you're like, hey, I've tried all these other things. Why not try this? Like, from the surface, it seems like a great option. And then you dive in and you go, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, she acted like she invented a brand new diet that had never been tried before. And my understanding of what it was if that you could eat whatever you wanted. There are no foods that are bad. Jesus thinks all foods are clean, but you should wait until you have the physical sensation of hunger. Your stomach should growl before you eat. And then as soon as you become full, you should stop eating. And if you still want to eat, even when you're not hungry, you're supposed to just turn your attention to God,
hmm It's
which is
basically
sort of
just,
like intuitive eating.
yeah, intuitive eating, fasting. There's an aspect of keto in there. She just kind of merged it all together and then put as a distraction rather than do something else was pray or go to church or call someone in your group. And she got into some hot water when she started comparing hunger and its effectiveness to things like the Holocaust. And I think that's when she got too confident. And she may have been saying things like that in more of a private, closed settings, but she started making these comments publicly during interviews. And it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, rightfully so, because you have her church being based in not in Nashville. It's a little outside of Nashville in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is a very wealthy county. It's predominantly upper class. So comparing people in those lifestyles where they're making a choice not to eat and Holocaust victims who are in concentration camps not given an opportunity to eat, I think are really horrible comparisons.
It's a disgusting comparison. I mean, she was definitely just saying that for shock value. What she was trying to say is if you starve someone, they will lose weight, which, duh, yeah, that's
Right.
true. No one's going to actually argue that. But that's, I mean, acting like what you're doing is inviting these people to live a camp style lifestyle, like that's their diet, is insane. So it's not a good comparison for her to make. I understand what she's trying to say, but I agree it's very offensive. And I
Yeah.
think that she rubbed a lot of Christians the wrong way with stuff she would say too, especially when it came to the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Gwen did not like that concept and totally rejected it.
hmm
And that's extremely important to most Christian faiths. So it kind of made her an outsider in an additional way. Not only is she a woman, but she's pushing back on a very core belief. So I think that she was very popular in her circles, but there were definitely people that were not fans and did not react well.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to the Holy Trinity, that really became prominent when she started her own church. So she started the Way
Hmm.
Down workshops um, prior to, and then in 99, she kind of founded Remnant Fellowship Church. And in one of those core beliefs was not believing in the Holy Trinity, like you mentioned. And being a non denominational Christian church, there were a lot of people that originally went with her and then left. So, from the documentary, their estimation of members was about 2,000. I'd be very curious how many went originally with her. And then after she made this announcement, decided to leave.
I think she definitely lost some followers,
And
but hard to track.
yeah, absolutely. Because it was based in Franklin, Tennessee, but it definitely became a national kind of movement. So there were people who would fly in to annual events or attend online, or you could do it remotely. And then she also purchased a Brentwood property called Ashlawn Plantation, which was kind of like their over the top event space, and all the weddings were there, the events, which were, it's a gorgeous property for anybody who hasn't looked it up. I highly recommend it. Um, but there's just something about these videos that you see affiliated with it, which are a little cringy because it just looks, everybody looks the same,
Yeah.
first of all. And second of all, it just looks so
Well,
fake. Like there's not, people look happy, but is it happy like I know I'm on camera, or genuine like it just doesn't sit well with me.
it's very cringy. It's kind of creepy, but also Gwen looks different than everyone else. I feel like, I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, but there's one big thing that everyone notices about Gwen, and it's her hair.
Uh,
Because in every
yes.
video, it stands out to me so much. And over the years, it's really in the Way Down, the documentary series, which I watched on Max. Her hair evolves with this church. Like when she was doing the Way Down workshops to when she started Remnant to the whole progression, her hair gets taller and taller and taller. And I've seen different theories about why that is. Like some people thought that because she was so thin that maybe she's had hair loss and it's just wigs or extensions.
Mm,
But I'm not sure. I mean, some people are also would say that she's just trying to like look youthful and it's like an overcompensation, but I don't think that really makes you look youthful. So I'm not
no.
sure. It's like the most extreme side part, poof. But in every video, it just smacked me in the eyes.
Yeah. It definitely grows as her power grows, I too think. Because if you look at her in her early years when this all started, it was a very normal haircut. She looked like a traditional housewife. And then I don't know who it was in the documentary, but they described her current look as like a strung out hooker, which I thought was very funny and I couldn't unsee it after they said it. But I think it's just the very intense eyeliner that she wears, the huge hair, it little
Mhm.
bit of a promiscuous risque clothing for what she's promoting. It doesn't really match what she tells other people to wear. So I think that's kind of
Oh,
where that
well,
thought went from.
absolutely. I mean, I think that, I mean, Gwen wears a lot of makeup, which I'm not
Mhm.
criticizing, but it doesn't always look very good. So I am
Right.
criticizing that. And she
It's a bit
also would
much.
put cornstarch on her face, which made it look whiter and was supposed to make her look younger, but I don't think that it did. It's just in some of the videos you can tell that her face is extremely white compared to her body, and it just looks strange.
It looks
But I mean,
cakey
Gwen is
too. And
nothing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. But
but
she's
here's
extremely hypocritical
what I don't
about
understand is if
everything.
she's trying to be youthful, she's worth millions of dollars. Go get Botox then. Like, go get a facelift. I don't understand this like
I think
around
she
the
was.
way option. Well, if she was, it was not doing, she wasn't, she needs a better injector. Like,
Yeah,
um,
for
but you're
sure.
right.
I don't think it looked great, but I think often it doesn't. Especially when someone's extremely thin.
Mm,
Sometimes fillers, Botox, plastic surgery, there's limits on what you can do at a certain body weight. I also would not be shocked if she was getting lipo or things like that because she
mm,
had to maintain her extreme thinness. It was the pillar of everything.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons. So we haven't talked about her husband at all. her
Which one?
first husband. Yeah, her first husband, where she got the name Shamblin, David Shamblin, who she had two children with, Elizabeth and Michael.
Hmm.
So she was married to him for a very long time, I think from 1978 to 2018.
Hmm.
Um, and he was not involved in Remnant. He was very at home, very not involved, but he was a very educated person and he was a business minded person. So Gwen was raking in the cash, and I think he was just kind of letting her do her thing. But in some of her meetings, especially in the way down, she would talk about how he isn't very supportive and how he struggles with his weight. And he was kind of kept out of the spotlight a lot because he would fluctuate with his weight and he didn't do the weigh down program. And I think that's one of the reasons they separated. Although I think there's definitely a bigger one.
Yeah, no, I agree. David was very independently successful too. So I don't want it
Yeah.
to be this idea that she was the only one making money. He was very successful on his own,
Mhm.
which gave her the opportunity to kind of make this church. And she did the same
Absolutely.
thing with her son. So much like her husband at the time,
Hmm.
his weight would fluctuate. And when he was, quote, right image, he would be shown at church, he would participate with things. But if he went a little bit over, like weight typically does, fluctuates depending on a bunch of things, she would push him into the kind of corner. And her daughter was honestly like a little replica of her. They look very similar, they're built very similar. She was very thin, very followed all the rules that were in place for her family. And David definitely loved her, from my opinion. I found nothing that he wanted to separate, but I think it got to a point where didn't necessarily agree with what she was doing, but she was happy and that's all that mattered to him. But he no longer fit the image that she wanted, and she found someone else who did and who could step into the light with her and make the things that she was preaching correct. The beautiful couple in weight, successful, like it was the image that she had been describing this whole time. And that's when Joe Laura, I think, kind of got introduced to her life.
Yes. I think she met Joe Lara and saw him as all the things that her husband, that she'd been with for over 20 years and raised two children with, was not.
Hmm.
Which is not a criticism of David, but no one's going to be perfect compared to a new, fun, exciting thing where you're having an affair, essentially.
Yeah.
And the reason I was calling Gwen a hypocrite is because in Remnant, people would go to Gwen and ask for advice and ask for permission to get divorced, and she would tell them they had to work it out and that it's not Christian to get divorced. And when she wanted to get divorced, she just was like, "Oh, that's different. This is totally different."
Yeah. Suddenly became conveniently allowed. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, she got married within months, also, like really fast. It was
Yeah.
clearly why they got divorced,
Oh,
was so that she could
100%.
get remarried.
It was
Yeah,
already, I think, planned. That was the intention before the divorce was even
definitely.
filed, in my opinion. Uh, but I got to
Hmm.
give it to Joe Lara. He saw an opportunity and he latched on. So, a little
Yeah.
background on Joe. He is an actor. And don't get me wrong, he's a decent looking guy. He played Tarzan in Manhattan in the 80s and 90s. And he's a good looking dude. I get it. He was shiny and new and
Sure.
attractive.
He wrote music, he played songs, he was
Hmm.
different, he was telling her everything she wanted to hear. He was very much gassing her up and was a yes man, but he also didn't really have a way to financially support himself.
Right.
So he had a lot of motivations for being with this extremely wealthy person.
Yeah.
Um,
From people in Joe's life, they kind of talked about he would latch on to a wealthy woman throughout his life and would just hop
Hmm.
from one to the other until he finally landed on Gwen and got married. And as an actor, I think he kind of utilized that ability to memorize and regurgitate information. And that's when you listen to him at the pulpit and him presenting videos and stuff with or without Gwen, he was able to really read her verses, I guess is a good way to put it, in his own words and be very convincing about it. So I don't even know if there was a true love there or if he was just kind of manipulating the situation because he could. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be hard to say, but I definitely think that he was opportunistic and it was part of his pattern. Doesn't mean that he didn't love her at all, but I just don't
Mm.
think that he had pure motivations. I think that there was definitely a lot of financial motivations, but also status. And I think he really enjoyed his rise to prominence. He is
Oh,
someone
for
that was seeking
sure.
fame that was not very successful. I mean, he had moments, but it's not like he had this enduring, incredible acting career.
Yeah, like he would be like a hit guy for a couple years and then disappear for like a while. So, other than those
I
big
don't think he really
two,
wanted to work.
oh yeah, I completely agree. So, the two of them got married, obviously, and she made her name even longer
Very
because
elaborate.
right. Oh my goodness. I
That
need people to look
that
up pictures
wedding
of
was
this.
her dress was, I mean, I don't even know if she could have walked through a door. Like, her dress was so poofy, her hair was so tall. They looked insane. It was a huge event, and a lot of people in the church kind of had mixed feelings about their leader getting divorced and having this giant wedding a couple months later. But on the whole, it seems like everybody was kind of celebrating, and Joe was embraced as part of the leadership.
It feels like they didn't have a choice because a lot of it I saw a lot of things online when I did a quick Google that they didn't like Joe, but they knew better than to question Gwen because if you questioned
Mm.
her, there were indirect consequences. And they kind of had to embrace Joe. So they put on that shiny, happy face and went, oh my God, yeah, he's great. We're happy she's happy. Except for those people in those
Yeah.
marriages being like, I have a lot of abuse happening and you told me to stick it out, but you just want a shiny new toy so you can get divorced. So I think those people were
Yeah.
it was a reason a lot of people left again.
Yes, I think so. I think that makes sense. And I can only imagine how upsetting that would be if you were hanging on to your marriage by your teeth because you thought that it was your only way to get into heaven, and then the person that told you that in the first place doesn't have to obey those same rules. But it's also not that surprising.
Yeah, I
She could
think
kind of do whatever she wanted.
right. I think historically anyone who has that kind of power in I'm going to call it a cult for a couple things we're about to start talking about. Uh
Sure.
there is no questioning. It's when it's convenient, the leadership is going to make whatever they want part of doctrine. It just is what it is. So one thing that I think that starts leading her into abuse territory is the Georgia versus Smith case, where
Oh, yeah.
the there were a couple that actually their child was murdered. Their 8-year-old son Joseph, due to discipline and that was encouraged by the church and Gwen. And it came to light during their trial that corporal punishment and these extreme uses of hitting them with a glow stick or a coat hanger or a switch was taught, instructed, and expected of members to children of all ages, not just older children. Like, if they could cry, this was expected to be done as a parent.
Yes. And I think that Physical discipline and corporal punishment is one of those issues that people feel very strongly about, and it's hard to make blanket statements. Not something that I'm necessarily a fan of, but I think even for people who believe in spanking or sometimes using physical discipline, they would look at this and think that this is extreme. I mean, other members of leadership were beating kids that are not their kids, but Joseph was getting it at church and also at home. And his parents lied about the circumstances that he got injured in, and it was obviously uncovered. But he basically had been abused over his lifetime, but then also had extreme abuse for a day and passed away. And the church completely had their backs the whole time. They still do.
They paid for all their attorneys, the um
Bail.
mhm, any because they did end up being found guilty, and then the church paid for their next appeals and their continuance, because if they go down that road, the church is going to start to get exposed. So they have to protect the members in order to protect themselves.
That's definitely what they thought. I think they probably could have let these people look like crazy people on their own, but I think that they thought it would all be connected to them. Um, the church was not charged any of this. There were accusations of the church's involvement, but I think some of that was because of how much they were helping to defend this family. I think that maybe if they not done that, it would have involved them less, but they were extremely involved. And even after these people were sentenced to life in prison, they were running prison ministries with the remnant support
Right. And
inside.
it
Yeah,
definitely,
it's
they brought the
crazy.
church in, and I think that the prosecutors would have done more with the church if there was more evidence to do so. The main thing that I think the church started feeling threatened on was because Gwen was asked about this couple, and there was a recording that between the Smiths and Gwen where Sonia, the mother, basically was describing a weekend of abuse to her 8-year-old, where she took everything out of his room except a Bible and locked him in there for 3 or 4 days. And then he came out, quote, subservient. And Gwen's response to that was, praise be to God. He's learning to be disciplined. He's learning to listen. He's learning to submit. Not, I can't believe you locked your child in a bedroom with nothing for 4 days, but a positive reinforcement to that parent and that behavior. And I think that was when they started looking at the church, and the church went, oh, we have to protect Gwen.
Ugh, so disgusting. Disgusting.
Yeah.
Um, I still think that the church would defend them to this point and say that they didn't do anything wrong,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I
which
completely agree.
is, I mean, I feel like his death is like proof that they did. But they also had a child die in their home a couple of months before Joseph. They had a child who died from SIDS, which, as
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about, is not a real diagnosis, and it's just a label that's used when there is no other clear explanation. But it makes me wonder, and I don't want to. I don't
Yeah.
know. It
I
seems very
did
odd.
read one report that the investigators wanted to say it was pneumonia due to neglect, but the coroner just couldn't definitely be like, yes,
Mm,
absolutely. So end up having to make it SIDS. And that's what kind of closed down that investigation. That because if there's two in the home and it's both abuse, I think that would have gave them the leverage to dig. But with one being SIDS and one being abuse, it's harder to argue and put resources towards when it's a theory, you know? But
definitely. I just think it's suspicious
oh,
and
100%. Mhm.
definitely atypical, And it's, I don't know. For a baby to have pneumonia, you would think there would be hospital visits and things like that. I think that, I mean, I guess you could have very rapidly developing pneumonia, but it tends to be something that you're sick with for a while, and not getting medical attention for a child who's sick is a type of neglect.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
I don't know either.
I there was a few cases of SIDS that were discussed within Remnant, and one of the big ones was Gwen's daughter Elizabeth. One of her children died from,
Hmm.
it was deemed SIDS, and it probably was. But something that was interesting about that to me was that you weren't really allowed to grieve in Remnant. You just kind of had to act like everything was fine, because everything that happens to you is God's will. It's one of those kind of belief systems. So you're not really supposed to mourn the dead. You're like allowed to just, you're supposed to just immediately move on, is what it seemed
Hmm.
like to me, which I guess
Yeah.
maybe would serve Elizabeth.
Yeah. I interpreted that very much as it was because it was Elizabeth that they weren't allowed to grieve, because she was the member of the leader's family. And because she was a member of the leader family, there's no way that God would ever punish her in that way, because she is higher and more godly than other members. I think if it happened to just a lower entry person who just part of the congregation, maybe they would have been able to identify it and then been told, well, what did you do to angry God that this was how he reacted? I think it, because it was Elizabeth, you couldn't allow people to have the idea that they weren't perfect.
Yes. I mean, if that's the case, they're a very unlucky family.
Yeah.
They're a very God has not smiled down upon them. They
No.
did have a lot of financial success, but
Yeah. Little
other
foreshadow
things
there.
were lacking. Yeah, foreshadow. But I
um,
think that also could be true talking about just like Gwen's husband struggling with his weight and Michael struggling with his weight, substance abuse, porn,
mhm,
infidelities. He had a
mhm.
lot of different issues. All of these, Elizabeth's child dying, I think all of those things Gwen felt reflected poorly on her and
Yeah.
her, the image that she was trying to project. Whereas if you do all the right things, then all the right things will happen for you. And
And she did her best to
it's just
bury
not.
anything that didn't align.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, one other that I think, in addition to those two, that really pushes that cult mindset is, I guess this one's kind of two part, but she really focused a lot of her preaching from the book of Revelation, which is the final days book, kind of. And
Hmm.
you see the book of Revelation come up a lot in these extremist and high control groups. They're very, it's a book that's a lot darker than a lot of the other testimonies and parts of the Bible, which I think is, again, controlling. This connects a lot with defining the Trinity and denying, excuse me, the Trinity, and keeping her members within each other. So outsiders are bad, and you can't marry outside the church. So they would recruit members, and in the documentary series, that is a storyline of one of these families that their daughter was recruited in, and the only way she could marry her boyfriend and quote the love of her life was to convert and be part of this church, and then distance herself from her family who are not members because they're a bad influence. And anybody who leaves then gets ostracized. You don't hear from anybody. They talk bad about you. They spread rumors. You lose family. Another way that we see in a lot of cults and groups, only the people in the church are the chosen one. It's the one true church, and anybody else is going to bring you to hell and bring sin into your life.
So I don't want to act like I don't have any sympathy or empathy for those parents, because we're talking about Delaney, right? The
Yes.
the girl that married into Remnant. So
Hmm.
her parents, to me, I do feel for them, because it would be terrible to have your child marry into a cult, like with people whose religious beliefs are just totally foreign to you. But it does seem like their daughter chose that willingly and always had other options. And maybe she was brainwashed, I guess, but she was an adult
I mean,
and she
she
was
was a
making a decision.
teenager. She started as a teenager, though.
She
She
was
started
what,
in high school.
in high school, but she got married as an adult, a young adult.
Yes.
Like I think she was
Yes.
19. She was
Hmm.
very young. I'm not saying that that was a good decision on her part, but I feel like they were acting like Remnant kidnapped her, where she just was actually probably making a bad decision about who to marry because she was young and immature, which are both problems, but they are different problems. And I think I would also probably fixate on it if I was her parent, the cult of it all. But that's not actually the main problem. The main problem is that your teenage daughter, instead of like valuing education or any of the opportunities that you can provide for her, is willingly submitting to this cult like thinking and wants to get married as soon as possible. And that's a bigger problem to me than Remnant encouraging it.
Yeah, I see that perspective for sure. I think in their circumstance, the way I interpret it is that the controlling aspect of Remnant, where she had to go to church multiple times a week or there was repercussions. She wasn't allowed to, quote, define her relationship unless she was part of the church. She couldn't communicate with her parents about certain things. And once she got married, there was a distance there that kind of was created where it's us versus them mentality. And I don't know if it's just with a bad, they already had a bad taste on it and then it just kind of amplified for them. Because if you're in it and you see people who have left and they're also telling you all these negative things, I think it just feeds that idea. But I also see your point of like, at the end of the day, she technically was a legal adult at the time making this decision, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like, she's 18, she's allowed to make her own choices. Just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean that they're wrong for her if they're wrong for
To
you.
me, it's very, very different to be brought up since very early childhood in a faith, in a high control religious environment, because that limits your options and your choices. She had the opposite experience of growing up in a more secular world and then choosing to convert. Whether she did it for the right reasons or not, I think a lot of people convert for marriage. I don't maybe agree with it, but I do think it's a very common practice. And I'm not going to fault anybody for following their heart if they feel like that's what they should do. I think maybe her and her parents had other issues.
Hmm.
And I think that it's very easy to, and I'm not trying to defend Remnant. I feel like I'm doing that, but I just feel like they can't deal with the fact that their daughter may not want to have a very close relationship with them. And maybe it's because of this guy, maybe it's because of his church, but I feel like she was just pulling away. And it was kind of a stretch to even include her in the documentary, in my opinion. But I know why
Yeah.
they did, obviously. The dates are significant.
Yes. I think the dates
But
are
I think
significant.
otherwise it wouldn't have really been.
But I think the reasoning too was to show the other side on how they brought people in from one perspective and then distance them, because there's a lot of other people in the documentary who were in at the beginning and kind of went with the church as it grew and then
Mhm.
left and were ostracized. So I think they wanted to show
Sure.
like both avenues of it. I think they may have been able to pick a better example of that, but I think, like you said, the dates really align for her wedding, which was
The dates are
in,
extremely significant.
yes, May of
Yeah, I
21.
have the exact date. It's May 29th, 2021. Something else interesting, though, before we talk about that, is that The Way Down, which is a very popular docu-series about Gwen Shamblin, about the Remnant, it aired in two different sections. There was a three episodes were released in September of 2021, and two more episodes were released in April of 2022. All of the first three were filmed prior to May 29th, and the second two were edited together and new things were filmed to be
Mm-hmm.
released because of a plane crash that happened on Delaney's wedding day, which was um, a huge, huge deal for Remnant and for Gwen Shamblin's family because 7 people were killed on that flight, um, which I just had all their names, but
I'll
it
give people
was,
one guess on who was on the plane.
yeah. So Gwen Shamblin was on the plane. Her husband, Joe Lara, was flying the plane. And all of the reports that I have read and in the documentary said that the pilot became disoriented, essentially. So Joe became disoriented while he was piloting a small plane on the way to Palm Beach, Florida, which is a lovely place.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
He does have a
and
pilot's
so it was the
license.
two of them. He did.
Yes.
But the person that was teaching him how to fly did not think he was ready for flight into New York or LA or places with high traffic. I'm not sure if Palm Beach would be considered high traffic. It's a very small airport.
During
So
that
maybe
time of
that's
year,
different.
maybe. But, no, he
Yeah.
definitely wasn't confident in his abilities. I think that was kind of an, like,
Right.
CYA for picking New York, but I don't think he was confident in general for him.
Right. I think he knew how to fly, but he was very reliant on instruments,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't a competent. It wasn't something that
Pilot.
he did professionally. It wasn't something that he was amazing at, but had flown a lot before and obviously had not crashed before, but this time he did. So he's killed. Gwen is killed. Elizabeth's husband, so Gwen's son-in-law, Brandon, is killed. And then two more couples from Remnant
Yeah,
were
and these
killed.
were
Total of 7 people.
more high ranking, so closer to Gwen and her family, and they were taking a vacation down to their Destin beach house, which they did very regularly. And like you said, beautiful area. Totally understand why they're doing it. And they were flying private, and then it went down in Smyrna, Tennessee, or something along that names, in the Percy Priest
I think
Lake.
that's how you say it.
Say it with
Yeah,
confidence, right? Say it how Gwen would say it.
absolutely.
Smyrna, Tennessee.
Exactly how Joe would say it.
Yes.
Smyrna, Tennessee. uh, yeah, the plane was in pieces. I mean, it was a horrific crash.
Yeah.
And the church response was kind of weird. Starting with Elizabeth texting everyone, like, oh, like, there's been a plane crash, but everyone's okay, and we'll update you as soon as we can, when it was very clear initially that everything was not okay. And that just shows like another level of denial that everyone was under. And like we said before, it was Delaney's wedding day, which had
Most
everyone
of the
from the church
church.
at it
Hmm.
because she was marrying a member of the church, and everyone was just acting like that did not happen. And I don't know what the right thing to do is in that situation, like if because otherwise I guess it would just ruin the wedding. But it kind of seems like a event worthy of ruining the wedding, and it's sort of bizarre not to acknowledge that.
Yeah. I think I have mixed feelings. So part of me is at the at the time. So the plane crashed in the morning and you're getting ready for the wedding. And then they were notified that they had crashed, but to the participants and the bride, to their knowledge, yes, there was a crash, but nobody had died. What they were being told
Yeah.
was that there was a rescue mission happening, not a
Mm,
looking for bodies mission, which I'm blanking on that name for some reason. And I think that because of that, they held on to the idea of, well, she was injured, but she's okay. So let's go on with the wedding. What I think is strange is everywhere that I could find, Gwen was typically at every wedding. She was typically the one performing the wedding. So it's bizarre to me she wasn't even there to begin with. Like, why this
I did think
day?
that was weird. I mean, Delaney's parents had told her that they wouldn't go if Gwen was officiating. I don't know if they had sway like that it could have changed anything, but she wasn't going to officiate. So I don't know if
Yeah.
maybe it just conflicted with her vacation plans or
Yeah, that
I
one
don't know.
definitely was bizarre to me. But like you said, they pretty much pretended it didn't happen. And it took a little while for them to actually notify the members that there was a death certificate issued for each of them.
Ugh, yes.
And
Which, yeah.
talk about betrayal, um, which I think, and this is just me, in my opinion, it would have rocked the church. And I don't think Elizabeth had made statements in the past that she didn't want to lead the church, but she would if she had to. And that's when everyone started going, she's just the one that makes sense. And I don't think ever the congregation never gave her an opportunity to not take over. And that's exactly what she did.
Right. I mean, well, Michael wasn't going to do it, even though he's
Right.
the older child, but he was not cut out for it. And Elizabeth, to her detriment, I think, is extremely cut out for this. I think that Gwen trained her to be ready for this, not for this exact situation, but to take over eventually. I think that was always kind of Gwen's plan. But I mean, Elizabeth lost so much in this crash.
Oh my God,
It's
I know.
truly horrific. Like her mother, her husband, one of her best friends, her stepdad killed all of them essentially through his inability to fly a plane. It's, I mean, that's crushingly devastating. And Elizabeth has seemingly been extremely strong and just barreling through and is still a leader at Remnant now because the church is
Mhm.
going on. The leadership was still in place. You know, all of the men that Gwen had running her organization, except for the ones on the plane, are still all in place. So it's
Yeah.
Elizabeth is running it, but she's not doing it all alone.
And I think actually, ironically, the death of Gwen may be able to have the church that she established run the way she preached rather than the way she ran it. Because the structure of the church, what she told people was there was God, there was the hierarchy of men, which was a group of, I think, 4 or 5 men in higher positions that helped lead the church and make decisions and keep the people in like a spiritual track. And then it was Gwen, and then it was the congregation. But in reality, it was Gwen, then these men, then the congregation. And I think
Mm-hmm.
with Elizabeth kind of coming in, like you said, she's not doing it alone. How could she also?
Yeah.
Considering the loss that she just had. But I think she's going to definitely be her mother's daughter. I've watched a couple of her preaches and testimonies since the crash, and she has potential. She's very much a little copy, but I do think she's going about it more where, at least from the outside perspective, we don't know internally, that these men are actually above, and then it's her. She's more of the figurehead, but these men have a lot more power than they used to.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Because,
I think,
where's the quote? I did write it down that she said relatively soon after they kind of started accepting it. Um, and she said, my mother started it, and I wanted to not only keep it going, but expand it around the globe in such an exponential level that everyone who sees it can pick it up and get it. And I
Mhm.
think that's the avenue of like she had been taught her whole life about this avenue for her by her mom. And how else do you kind of present that when you're asked? I don't know if she's actually going to try and execute that, but I think she's playing a very good part of being in front.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. I think that Elizabeth will do a pretty good job. I think she could keep everything running. Um, it also probably helps that she inherited all of Gwen's money
Right. That doesn't hurt.
because her and Michael became the sole heirs of Gwen's will, even though as recent as like 4 weeks prior to her death, I mean, she was telling the news, she would give interviews and say that it's selfish to hold on to your money and that you should always be pouring back money into your church and mission work, charity, stuff like that. She did not leave a dime to the church or to charity. She left it to her children. They got everything.
Hmm.
So,
And interestingly, Michael pretty much has stepped away, which we all kind of assumed was happening. And
yeah.
his only public statement, not only one, but one of the few he made was that he has sympathy for his sister. And he doesn't attend church services at all and doesn't directly speak poorly or negatively about his sister. But definitely, this was an opportunity for him to be able to remove
Yeah.
himself. I don't think Gwen ever would truly let him, but I don't think Elizabeth has the energy to not.
Yeah, I don't think Elizabeth's going to come chasing him down. She has she has children, she has millions of dollars that she has to be managing. She has an entire church depending on her as a figurehead. I mean, she's not chasing after Michael. She also didn't really want to share the pulpit with him, and he wasn't cut out for it anyway. And I think that it's probably a blessing in disguise for Michael. I'm sure losing his mother was absolutely horrific, and his sister's husband. I mean, it's very upsetting. But to your point, like he, unlike Delaney, grew up in this church, and not just in the church, but with your mother as the leader, and it was his sources of income, his friends, his family, his beliefs, his dieting, everything, the music that he was subduing for the church. It was all encompassing, and he wasn't supposed to have a life outside of his mother's church. So I think now that she's gone and he can just shove everything over to Elizabeth, he can just kind of live his life.
Yeah. And oddly, I think this has changed now in 2024, but for a long time, Elizabeth also wasn't present at church, which, in my opinion, I think was a good decision because she thought what was best for her. She just went through a lot of loss, but she would record and then the recordings would be played in church. So for a long time, she wasn't present at church. And I think that was a lot of uneasiness for the church as a whole and made it tough for the current congregation. And for, but however, those who stayed definitely were the most devout. As like you said, it's still
Yes,
up and running.
it is.
I gotta go.
It's an
I gotta
interesting.
say, it's beautiful. The landscape is beautiful. Like it's a nice place to go to church.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was visually stimulating. All of
Yes,
the
a lot of
footage of
help
her,
videos, a lot of
music
music. Like it looks like it was a
videos.
good time.
I don't think it was, but it did look that way.
I think if
I
like
just
you
have a
went
hard time
once and you were
believing
like,
it.
yeah, like oh, let's go listen to the fun music and like socialize, and then be like, as long as you don't like take in what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I
um,
don't think I could hang out with any of these people, but I would also probably go to McDonald's after we had water for lunch.
right, exactly.
But
Like,
that's
yeah,
that's
I
me. That's my
also,
own issues.
yeah, I also haven't eaten for 2 days as this like Twix bars in my purse.
I'd be like, I just have the physical hunger. Like, I need to get some nuggets. Like, get out of my
Yes,
way. We need the spicy buffalo sauce. I mean,
God told
I
me
don't
it
know.
was okay. It's fine.
But
We're
but maybe
awful.
this is my lack of religion, I think that might be the
Yes,
problem.
it's
Because
because
this
you're
would
going
not
to
work for
hell.
me. But I know, but it's like I just want to be skinny.
Oh, that's one of those things when
It's
I
like
first
it's so
it's
vain.
so
It's
dumb.
so
Oh yeah.
vapid.
But I think that's
It
part of just
makes
the
no
American culture,
sense.
right? Yeah, you see that image,
Yeah.
and the first time I ever watched this documentary was that I watched the whole thing and I was like, "Wow, that's wild." And then the other part of me went, "If only I was like a devoted Christian, why wouldn't you try
I
it?" Like,
know.
it's one of those I'm like, "I get it." Because if I had that kind of commitment to God already, I could very easily see how people would go down this path. I get it. I just don't have that. I don't know. My draw to pasta is way too strong.
I know. I mean, I'd be lying if I would say if I haven't been watching Gwen content, being like, I could probably do this. It's just the turning it over to God that gets me every time.
Yeah.
But I think it's basically just like intuitive eating and portion control. So I have done that,
So
and just
every other
like
diet out
all of the
there.
other people, but just like all the other people that have like left her church or her other yo-yo dieters because we're all fucked up about food,
Mhm.
they gain the weight back. Just
Right.
like every diet that I've done where I've lost weight and then gained it back, and how unfortunately I'll probably continue to do until I go to hell.
Oh, 100%. I feel
But
that.
I mean that's what I'm doing. So good for Gwen, I guess, that she was able to take her eating disorder and monetize it. Um
Well, she gained her freshman 15, so don't forget that.
I still have my freshman 15. So I my sympathy for her. I mean, she did die in a horrifically terrifying way, and I don't wish that upon anyone, but I do think it's kind of funny in a super messed up way that her whole thing is that God gives you what you deserve, and like
Right?
God will bless your life if you deserve it, and she exploded in a plane with the other people that were preaching her bullshit. I mean, if that's
Yeah.
not God baby saying, "Hey, you
Let
don't
people
speak for
eat
me,"
pista.
like I don't know what is. Like you're saying everyone's supposed to skip lunch on Thanksgiving. Like dinner is lunch at Thanksgiving. If I don't eat lunch, I'm not going to eat all day.
Right?
So,
You're right. I did skip
I
dinner on
mean,
Thanksgiving. You're welcome. I just had 3
yeah,
lunches
I just had
instead.
lunch. Right. Well, my dinner was at 2 o'clock, so call it what you want. But like, I'm not gonna not eat like at a holiday. It's crazy,
Yeah.
and I am not like opposed to like intermittent fast. Really, anybody can do whatever they want. I don't care. But I just think it's terribly ironic. Um, and I hope that Elizabeth doesn't die from anorexia. She looks really, really,
She's
really
very
thin
thin
to
now.
me.
And I think there's a combo of an
And
eating issue and severe depression. Because again, I don't think we mentioned it, is they
yeah,
don't believe in medications. So if you have a
right. Or
severe
therapy.
mental health condition that needs medication, and honestly, if I lost my child, my best friend, my mom, and my husband all within a very short period, I probably also would need some kind of professional help to get out of that. Like,
Well,
I,
I mean, if she sought therapy and medication, got a support group, got help, that would be flying in the face of everything that she was taught.
right, it's
And
not
she's just
allowed.
supposed to turn all of her pain to God. So that's what she has to do. And I hope that she's secretly in therapy and secretly like getting all of the help and support that she needs. But I think it's really sad and very harmful and damaging. And to tell people that they're not allowed to seek help outside of the church, to me, that makes it a cult. And I just think it's really not helpful. And I think it causes a lot of, it doesn't necessarily cause depression, but it's depression is a real thing that can really happen to anyone. And there's nothing wrong with seeing medical professionals when you're having a medical issue like that. And I just think that they made it seem like a personality flaw, like a character defect, which is what a lot of religions do. And I just think it's very damaging. They're also were doing conversion therapy type stuff for gay people. It was just, I mean, all of all of the things that they believe are just so foreign to my way of thinking. But I, yeah, I don't know. Oof. Do you have any final thoughts about Gwen?
I was just gonna say you kind of answered my question if you thought they were a cult or not, because I personally
If you
do.
thought they were what?
If they were a cult,
Oh, a cult?
hmm
I think so.
I
I
agree.
think if
I
you're
don't.
that insular, it sets off the cult thing in my brain.
Yeah, I do think though, which is different than other ones we've had. I do think that with the new leadership, it has the opportunity to no longer be a cult. I think under Gwen, it
Mm-hmm.
was a cult, and there was no question to me. But I think under Elizabeth, there is actually an opportunity for this to shift and just be a more strict Christian based church and not necessarily a cult. I do think there's that opportunity there. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. But I do think there's opportunity there, unlike a lot of other organizations we've seen and talked about.
Well, it'll just be like more of a generic evangelical religion run by men, essentially.
Yep.
So it just won't be, it won't have the flair that it had when Gwen was in
The
charge. So I don't know if
sparkle.
it'll appeal to women in the same way. But I mean, the weight loss stuff, that'll draw people in, drawing us in, and we're very skeptical of it. So I think that if, I mean, her books are all still available for sale. There's, the church is still making a lot of money, I think. Um, so they'll continue to run as a more normal Christian church, I think. But I agree, it's probably not as cultish now because I do think that Gwen was the charismatic leader and Elizabeth maybe could be the charismatic leader. I mean, if she does choose to become a Gwen type figure, she will have an amazing story to talk about what she's overcome. And that I think would sell a lot of books. So maybe Elizabeth will publish a memoir about how she overcame the darkest thing someone probably could go through.
That's a good point. That's an
But
interesting one. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's still very recent though. It's
Yeah.
only
I
three
think as
years
long as
ago.
she's in charge and the church is active, that won't happen. But maybe one day.
Ugh, I would probably read it.
All right. Well, that was everything I had for Miss Gwen and the affiliates of her and Remnant Church. And I think on to our next cult or criminal mom.
All right, sounds good. We will talk soon. Have a good one.